I've put effort into this because I sucked at it. And you should too, because, you don't have to suck at relationship. Like you can actually have more skill, and you can have relationships that further your growth, that expand your capacity for curiosity and empathy and play and joy and love.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Kristen Donnelly, and I am one of the good doctors of Abbey Research. Here at Abbey Research, we believe deeply in the idea that if we all understood each other a little bit better, not agreed with or condoned actions or anything else, but understood the intellectual discipline of understanding somebody else's point of view, if we all did that, we'd be better humans. And if we were all better, deeper, richer humans, the world would be less fractured. And this series is in service of that. It's called Welcome to My World, and it's powered by curiosity, which is the beginning point for any of that transformation. And I talk to fascinating folks from all different walks of life who are different than me, which is everybody, about something in their lives that they know that the rest of us should, that would make us fuller, deeper, richer humans. And today is absolutely no exception. I am thrilled to death to be joined by Marie Elizabeth Malley, who is one of my favorite thinkers. The way that she talks is just, it blows my mind. I'm so excited for you guys to meet her. She's a relationship alchemist. Don't worry, we're going to get into it. Who helps women and couples deepen love and connection in their relationships, drawing on her master's in Chinese medicine and 20 years of client work over it, actually. She teaches people how to be authentic instead of shrinking themselves to fit in. God, if I had met her in my 20s. Her work has been featured in Thrive Global and Forbes, and now on Welcome to My World. Marie Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for that fantastic introduction. And I love that you lead with curiosity, because that is one of my number one tips in relationship, is to stay curious. So we're so aligned there.
I love it. Yeah, it's a superpower. It's really a superpower if we all learn to harness it a little bit better. So speaking of what you do, we work with couples. What is a relationship alchemist? Unpack that for us.
You bet. So alchemy, the ancient practice of alchemy, was this magical, turning iron into gold, turning lead into gold.
Yeah, I know it from Harry Potter. So
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So it's also used as a term in a more psychological and spiritual context to really describe the process of transformation.
Oh, okay.
So it's also aligned with your idea of transformation and how, being curious with one another facilitates that. A relationship alchemist, it is a term that I coined. There is no one other than me.
Oh, there you go. Okay, that's why I don't know what it is. So
that's
fantastic.
Why you don't know what it is. But I chose alchemist because of the depth of transformation that is possible through our intimate relationships when we learn to approach them as a vehicle for learning more about ourselves, for refining ourselves, for becoming more skillful, for becoming free of past patterns that used to, hamper us. And so alchemy, I like it better than other words because it implies using the raw materials that are right here. So, and transforming them, transmuting them into something new. Because so much of my work centers around supporting people and accepting and loving who they are. You don't have to become somebody else to be great at relationship. It really is, you have to become more yourself. And the more true you can be to yourself within your relationship, the better it will tend to go if you're with the right person, or it will illuminate very quickly that you're not with the right person because they don't love that real you. And so I like alchemy as a framework for the kind of work I do with relationships because it implies using everything that's already here and creating something new and beautiful with it.
My mind is spinning. So when I heard Relationship Alchemist, I was definitely under the impression, just from the linguistic formation, that it was more about couples than individual work, but it's not. It's the individual work that drives the togetherness.
You got it. Yeah,
Okay.
always, always. And I do work with couples as well as individuals,
Okay.
but even within that, I'll often give people individual work to do because of what they each have going on,
Okay.
as well as the couple work to do. Let's say they're working on communicating better, or they want to shift. They always end up in the same fight. Well, how do we reverse engineer what happens so that we can insert a wedge sooner in the process, so they don't always land in the same place and they can actually branch somewhere new that's more effective and feels better. So there is definitely couple work, but I really feel like our relationships are an outgrowth of how we show up in them.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And I am frequently saying that whenever we say the word relationship in this kind of context, people's minds, we are programmed to go to the romantic relationship, to marriages, to whatever. But if we could do the same attention to business partnerships or friendships or things like that, we would have, like, I listen to a podcast called My Favorite Murder, and the two hosts talk all the time about going to therapy together.
Wow.
Because they are business partners, and their business grew really fast, faster than either one of them ever anticipated. And they became pretty famous almost overnight. And so and they both have really high anxiety and very different personalities. And so they go to therapy together. Amazing. And I remember sitting there listening to that episode and thinking, my God, if every business partnership went to therapy together, like,
we would live in such a better world,
such a better world. And so that's like what you're talking about, is that we can show up with our best selves. The business partnerships might also, friendships might need to dissolve. Like, it's Absolutely. Not just covenantal romantic relationships.
That's right. And the skills that we learn in one domain often serve in another. And some of them are different, right? So like when you're a CEO of your own business, it doesn't tend to work so great to try to be the CEO at home. You need to learn how to shift into a different part of yourself to relate more effectively with your partner. So there is some flexibility involved. So it's not like a straight skill translation from one location to another. However, learning how to ask skillfully and generously and effectively for what you want at home, for sure, helps you close sales in your business, because you get more comfortable with the process of asking for what you want, or just asking for things that might be uncomfortable in the moment. You just get more facility with it. So there are skills that translate, but there are other shifts that need to be different depending on which relationship. Like, you wouldn't, certain ways of communicating that you would use with a partner, you might not use with your mother. It's just like not the same thing. But there are other skills that are the same, that translate to both relationships.
Yeah, my husband and I use a lot more profanity than I do with my mom. So there's a specific thing there. I love when you said ask generously. That is so often when I listen on negotiation workshops and stuff, and they talk about asking for what you want, there is no acknowledgement of the other party.
Right.
Like, there's no, like, you got to ask for what you deserve. Okay. Right. What you deserve might also not be in the budget line, and that doesn't actually reflect on you. It just reflects on reality. So If you state what you want and ask for what you want generously, it also allows for the other party to be a human in the conversation too.
Absolutely. I always say in relationships, you want to ask directly and clearly for what you want and stick around to negotiate. Because there's a big difference between a request and a demand.
Yes.
And very often we think we're making a request. This is how humans are sneaky, because we think we're making a request, but underneath it, it's actually a demand. And the way you know the difference is if it doesn't feel good to the other person to say no. If they're feeling some kind of way about, if I say no to this, I'm going to get punished, I'm going to get stonewalled, I'm going to get yelled at, and they feel they have to say yes, that was a demand. And so part of communicating more skillfully in your relationships is be clear about when it's a request and when it's a demand. And if you're
Because
getting,
there are some times that we just have to demand
well,
things.
that we just
Yeah.
have to demand things. There are certain
Yeah.
things that, yeah, that's the case, but be upfront about it. Like, hey, this actually needs to happen. This isn't a request.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. There's been a couple times in my, even in our business partnership that Aaron and I, we've said to the other person, this isn't a negotiation. This has to get done. Like
That's exactly right.
This has to get done. Who's going to take care of it?
Right.
Kind of
Which is
yeah.
a very different conversation than like, hey, would you maybe?
Yeah. Like I have this idea.
Thing?
Can we talk about it a little bit?
Exactly. And then they feel terrible afterwards if it doesn't go right, or it doesn't go done in time, or it doesn't go well. And yeah, that would have all been saved by just being really upfront, like, hey, this has to get done. Who's going to do it? How do we track it? How do we stay on target? Et cetera. Versus, would you please pick up the milk at the store? Which is a request, unless
but
it's
not.
a demand, but or not, right?
Yeah,
sometimes
it's one of those, like, yeah, it's my husband. So my husband's from Northern Ireland, and we have really different definitions of the word nag. So this is something we've discovered in our marriage in the last couple of years, is that I never want to ask for something more than once.
Yeah.
Because to me, that's nagging.
Yeah.
And to him, it's not. It's just holding him accountable and helping him remind things. But then I get furious with him when things wouldn't get done.
Exactly.
He's like, but you didn't remind me. And I'm like, but you're an adult. Why do I have to remind you? I don't want to have to nag you. And he's like, well, it's not nagging me. So we had to like finally sit down and kind of say, okay, what is nagging? What is holding accountable? How are we going to do this? Because this is not sustainable.
That's so beautiful that you sat down to figure that out. You figured out there was a different style of communication and got clear about what each one typically does. And then it sounds like you worked out a way that works better.
Yeah. And it's a continual growth thing. I mean, this is
Absolutely.
I could talk forever about being in cross-cultural marriages, because even though every marriage is cross-cultural, because we all grow up in different contexts.
Yeah.
There's those of us that are in wider cultural gaps.
Yeah. As am I too. Yeah.
Yeah. And God, the things we learn and the stuff I hit where I'm like, well, I just assumed this is how the world worked. And he'll react so differently that I'm like, pause.
Wow. Yeah.
What's going on in your head?
Well, Patrick and I were just having a conversation about that this morning. We were talking about different assumptions about prioritization of when things should get done. And I have an assumption. So I tend to need to see things, leave them out and see them, or else I forget they need to happen.
Got it.
And I'll put things away once they're handled. So like, if there's something that needs to be, let's say you're running out of detergent, like I will leave the detergent on the counter and say, hey, we need more detergent. And I need that detergent there. So I remember that we need it before I go do the laundry and the thing is empty. You know? Well, Patrick has a different filing system in his brain. So he just kind of files like, oh, we need detergent. He doesn't actually need to see the detergent. So he'll put it away. When he puts it away, I've completely forgotten about it, that it's empty. And the way his brain works is he'll be out and maybe he'll be at a store and his brain will just lob up detergent when he needs it.
God bless that brain.
God bless that brain, because that is not my brain.
No.
And his brain will just go detergent and then he'll pick up the detergent. Now, sometimes he does forget and we do run out. I'm just using a hypothetical.
Yeah.
But very often his brain will lob the thing he needs at the time when he needs it. And that's just not my brain. And so this is just something we figured out this morning. And in terms of the accountability thing, like he would much rather, if I just tell him something, he'll forget it. But if I text it to him and he has it on his phone, he's much more likely to remember. So I've had to learn that. To text requests to him instead of just as he's flying out the door, say, oh, by the way, because he'll never remember that.
Yeah. We have there's a kind of an online messaging system called Discord that you may or may not be familiar with.
I've heard of that.
Okay. I love Discord. It's a lot of my life, but because one of the things you can do is create private servers in it and you only let certain people into it. So John and I have created a private server for ourselves. And throughout the day, we have all of our conversations on there. There's a channel that is just for chit chat. And then there's a channel for like, here are all the ideas for the house. And then there's a channel for, hey, I found this recipe. And so some of it was like organizing stuff too, because he hated scrolling back through text messages to find to-do lists. And I was like, well, that's valid. Let's come up with another thing. And so much of it was, I think we had it's a gift. We had a gift of a lot of our relationship being fast forwarded because my university did something wonky with my immigration paperwork. And so there was a threat that I could end up having to leave Northern Ireland very suddenly.
Mm.
And we had only been together for about 5 months, but I was in my early 30s, he was in his mid 30s. And like, you kind of know, so we're at that point where it's like, well, shit or get off the pot. I guess we're going to get married. And so we had to which is still my only proposal that he's ever given me. It's the only, he's like, I said, what are we going to do if I get deported? He goes, we'll get married. Still my only proposal. But we had to communicate in very stressful situations really, really quickly. Yes. Trying to bring two families together in wedding ceremonies and who was going to get left out and what was going to happen. And we're two different faith systems. And so what does this look like? And kind of all this stuff. But the alchemy, as you talk about, I've really noticed I've done a lot of personal growth during COVID.
Yeah.
Because I finally stopped after being in crisis for like half a decade. I finally stopped and like could look at things. And I've noticed that as I've become more comfortable in my own skin, I am more comfortable with saying without judgment or fear or anything else, this is what I need right now. Yeah. And as I have said that, he has risen to that. And it's like, oh, I'm so grateful that you're saying explicitly what you need.
Oh, it's like, such a gift to be doing that.
So good. And so we say all the time, I write short stories, and he said at one point a couple of months ago, like, in your short stories, you say all the times I'm too old to play games. And he's like, we are too old to play games and we don't even know we're playing games. So like, let's do this. And it's such an incredible difference of like, every time I hit a new place where I feel comfortable and I tell him, this is what I think my priority is right now. And he'll say, okay, I think I vibe with that. Or he'll say, I don't love that. Like, let's keep talking. And he hates words. And so that's the other thing. He doesn't feel he expresses himself very well. And that was a major stumbling block for a long time. And so this idea of this alchemy, I really love, because as we're both transforming as people, which we do all the time, intentionally or non.
Correct.
Yep. Our relationships transform intentionally or non. So what I'm hearing you say is that we just have to be intentional about it.
Be more deliberate about it. And more.
Oh, I love that word. I love the word deliberate.
I do too, because it implies an intentionality, like you said. It implies attention, putting attention. I feel like our relationships, what happens for a lot of people is there's so much attention put on the dating process and finding the one and all that stuff. And then you sort of, okay, now I have my person. And then it's like, great, check. I can now turn my attention to other things, right?
And now
like,
it's time to have a baby, or now it's time to get a mortgage.
Now it's time to like blow up my career. Now it's time to do whatever. And this is a person, a living, breathing person that you live with.
Yeah.
And ideally, I'm a growth-oriented person. I'm not a fixed mindset person. I'm a growth mindset person. So I'm speaking as a growth mindset person. Ideally, both of you are continuing to explore and grow and be curious about life and curious about yourselves. And for the relationship to stay current and to grow with you, you want to let each other in on your interiority, on what's changing, on what's beautiful, the way you described, like, hey, I discovered this thing about myself and now I need this. And then that opens up a new conversation. Is that something he's down with or not? Or like, do you need to renegotiate it in some way, right? So that's how you stay current on the edge of each of your individual growth and have the relationship support it.
Yeah.
Right? Because if a relationship is just there so you can say you're not single, it's not very alive. And that's how relationships tend to slide into this kind of morass of ambivalence, and often disrepair. I mean, you get disconnected because you're not staying current with each other.
Oh my gosh. So many things, but one of my curiosities at this moment is, how'd you get into this work?
Well, we teach what we most need to learn.
Love it. Okay.
So I married a wonderful man who turned out to be really a best friend, like a great, my mother loved him. He checked all the boxes. He was the perfect kind of, the perfect guy, but he just wasn't perfect for me. And so it took a lot of, I got physically ill. It just took a huge decline for me to realize, oh, it's not that I'm hopelessly messed up and incapable of happiness in a long-term committed relationship. It's that this relationship actually isn't the right one, as wonderful, as wonderful as it is in many ways. And so after we divorced, I dove into, I kind of flailed for a couple of years, lots of really not healthy, happy relationships, just trying to kind of find my ground. Mm-hmm. And then that really propelled me into a deep study of what makes us tick. So I have this healthcare background. I've worked with people for a long time, since 1991. I started working with clients first as a massage therapist, then as a acupuncturist and herbologist after I got my master's. And then I burnt out on patient care. I actually became a life coach in 2003 and did that for a little bit, but realized, no, I'm actually tired of working with people and I just want to write. And so I left all my practice with other people and wrote intensely for 10 years, got my MFA in poetry from Sarah Lawrence, published a book, co-edited an anthology. And then as my marriage ended, I realized, I've had this really true to me flow of my work life, my whole adult life. I feel very clear about what I'm doing on the planet, how I want to serve, what feels good. I change when I need to change. Like that piece of my life has been so clear. And the murkiest area of my life till then had been relationship. How do I do this thing better? How can I be so flipping smart and not hack this thing, not be able to sustain a relationship over time? Well, past, 5 years, say. And so, well, we were together for 8, I think. Okay. And so that's when I dove into, in 2014, a deep study of relationships, sexuality, what makes us tick, how do you connect more effectively, how do you self-regulate better so your wounding isn't driving you, all these things that are necessary for a great relationship. And through that process of being trained as a relationship coach, I didn't even go into the coaching program planning to coach again. I was like, oh, I've done coaching. It's nice, but I'm done with working, I'm done with people. I just want to figure out how to have a good relationship. And then as I started practicing, because it was required with my peers, I remembered how much I loved working with people. It kind of brought me back to my initial impulse to be of service in that way in my life. And so in 2015, I began seeing clients again, and it's just been amazing since then. I just feel like all of me gets to come together, the creative piece, the relational piece. I feel like I've really found my spot.
I love it. I love like the burnout of I'm never working with people again. Like, God, the times I have said I'm never doing XYZ and then now I'm doing it.
Here we are.
We just don't tempt the universe like that anymore. We just don't. I absolutely love that this search of this curiosity and this search for your meaning and your healing has led to the healing of so many others.
It's such a privilege, really. And I really believe in walking. I mean, this is one of the feedback I get a lot, is like, you really walk your talk, right? I'm always suspicious when people sort of portray themselves as having it all together, because I'm always like, okay, really?
Yeah, they're really skilled con artists.
Like what's really going on, And so I'm very open about, this is a learning journey for me. And yes, and I've put effort into this because I sucked at it. And you should too, because, you don't have to suck at relationship. Like you can actually have more skill, and you can have relationships that further your growth, that expand your capacity for curiosity and empathy and play and joy and love. It can be that way. It's just so much in how we set them up, where we enter the relationship from within ourselves, what we're alchemizing, basically, as we live in the relationship. Where is your attention? Where is your curiosity? What is it that you're working on? How do you include your partner in that? How do you support one another? So Patrick and I met in a personal growth community that was very much working out stuff around relationships. And before we ever became a couple, we were research partners. You'll like this because it's research. We engaged in relationship research, which meant that we would choose something that we felt weak at, a skill we felt weak with, or just wanted to investigate. It wasn't necessarily a weakness, but it was just something we wanted to be more curious about. And then we would deliberately work with that thing for 7 days, because that was as long as he could commit. So it was like 7 days, 14 days, 30 days. You can set up any kind of research container you want. But let's say one partner in the relationship has a tendency, I'll use us as an example. So it's real. I'm not going to make one up. I'll tell you a real one. So one of the research, Patrick and I both have a tendency to be nice doesn't quite touch it. It's a flavor of being nice where we want to curate the other person's experience to make sure that they can receive what we're saying. So we both are we try to be very deliberate with our language so that what we're saying can be received.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yes.
Okay. So we engaged very early on when we decided to become research partners. We decided to spend 7 days just saying the thing, not varnishing it, not worrying about how it came out, and just saying whatever was happening and paying attention to what came up. And what I noticed was the things that I tended to want to hide and not say were vulnerable things that, like, I missed you today. I wondered if you'd sleep over tonight. I need a hug, that kind of stuff that's excruciating to a very independent and self-reliant, adult female. And so I would say those things because I had committed to saying those things, and he held it beautifully. Like he's very good with my tender young self. And we wouldn't have discovered that had we not done this research. Yeah. And the fact that he's very good with that tender part of me had me feel safe with him. Now, he had a story, as most men do, and many women too, that you never talk about old, past relationships with someone you're dating, even though we weren't officially dating. For the purpose of research, you pretend like you're dating. So he still had all these feelings for his ex-girlfriend. They'd broken up about 3 months before, and he still was really in it. And so his story was like, oh, I can't talk about that because, and so he talked about that because that was the commitment. And he would say, I still have feelings for her, and this is what's happening, and da-da-da. Now, I held that so well that it had him feel safer with me. And through the process of researching these different aspects of relating, we ended up falling in love. Like, we discovered through learning that we hold each other well in vulnerable places, then we fell in love. And we have such a solid relationship because it began from a place of each of us wanting to learn how to do something better and coming together as partners to do that. It's a very different place than coming in through what I call the romance door, where you see somebody across the room and you're like, oh my God, they push all my buttons, they're so hot. And then like you're off to the races. And that kind of chemistry, when we enter relationships with that kind of chemistry, that strong pull we feel to someone is often a sign that they plug into some of our childhood wounding. That's why it feels so overpowering, because they might remind us of our father who wasn't there. Or they might remind us, so then you attract unavailable men, or if you're heterosexual, maybe you had a withholding mother, and like I did, and then you attract someone who also is withholding, right? Because it's a familiar state to your nervous system. Your nervous system grew up in that soup of having a withholding parent. So of course, when you come across somebody who's withholding, that's going to feel like home. So if you ever want to grow out of that, you need to realize those things about yourself and investigate, like, well, is that really where I want to attract from? Or is there a me who is here now in present time who could have more agency in terms of who I'm attracted to? And one of the ways to do that is to play with dating and attraction as a research project for yourself. Not, you can either set it up deliberately with a partner like Patrick and I did, or engage in your own research, like, oh, I'm attracted to this person. What's that about? Does it feel sticky and old and weird, or does it feel fresh and chimey? However you receive information, does it feel fresh and new and like present? Like, am I in present time right now? Or do I feel like I'm 5 years old, like trying to get my daddy's attention, right? Is this making sense?
It is. And it's, I'm reminded there's a romance novel called The Kiss Quotient,
Oh,
where there's a woman who's neurodivergent and doesn't understand physical attraction at all
mm,
in terms of how she's experienced it. She doesn't think she's asexual or demisexual. Like she knows she is, in fact, heterosexual, but doesn't really know what to do with it. So she hires an escort and treats
amazing.
sex as a research project. Um,
Exactly.
and it is, I think it's so fascinating that this, so I mean, I didn't date in my teens or 20s, really. I had
Mm.
just a series of very emotionally doormatty relationships. And that's
As one does.
I was just everyone's emotional girlfriend. And nobody's chosen anything.
Got
And
it.
that was a huge thing, that the very first person that really actively chose me was John.
Beautiful.
And it was like this moment of, I'm actually writing a talk that I'm hopefully going to pitch to the Moth, about that process of when I knew that he chose me and I was safe, and he chose me not in spite of the baggage that I came with, but like with it all.
Yes.
And kind of
That's alchemy.
what that looks like. Yeah. And so now, as like folks are, people ask me like, when did you know? And I'm like, this sounds nuts, but it was the second date. And I didn't know it, that that's what it was at that time. But when I look back over when we started building that, and when I started saying like, this is my whole ugly self, it was our third date. It was our third date. And that was 10 years ago this December.
Amazing.
But I still sorry, there's a fly in my office. I still withheld a lot of things from him because
Mm.
I was afraid to trust him
Yeah.
with the ugly bits of me. And somebody said, essentially, like, part of your vows was saying that you were going to allow him the opportunity to show up.
Mm.
And if you don't allow him that opportunity to show up and be who he promised you that he was going to be, like, you're being a jerk. Like, he
Exactly.
said he's going to show up. You need to give him the opportunity to do that.
Amen.
And it
Amen.
was taking that advice, I mean, was another step of a season for us that changed how I kind of saw how things were going. And I think, if I could go back and tell 11-year-old Kristen anything, it is that relationships are so much more intellectual than you think they are.
Say more about that.
Like, it's not, it's a lot about choices.
Mm.
And not just about choices with the other person, but choices in yourself. And
Yes.
it has to be analytical, and it has to be, you can't act on gut instinct. We aren't entirely creatures of instinct. Like, that is one of the things that separates us.
Oh, it's the marriage of the two.
It has to be
Because
both.
I would
And
say you can't just intellectually manage.
no, but it's more my 11-year-old self. Like, I was raised in a diet of Harlequin novels, Broadway musicals, and,
Got it.
rom-coms.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I
It's not
kept
just going to
waiting.
magically happen and you're not going to be
Yeah. Like, I kept waiting for
that.
Richard Gere to show up in the limousine. And
Totally.
that's not my husband.
Right.
Like, John is not a
It
big
makes it so
gestures
much
guy.
better.
He's not a big gestures guy. And I remember at the beginning of our relationship, like, telling a friend of mine, I was like, I don't get like these tingly,
Mm.
like I'm not like overwhelmed with this desperate need to, like, the romance novels tell me I'm doing it wrong. And they were
Right.
like, yeah, no.
Well, I love that you articulated that, because the romance novels and the movies are part of what set us up to fail.
Yeah. And I love romance
Because,
novels, and I love the
yeah,
evolution of them,
I
that a
love
lot
them
more of them
too.
now are like, a lot more of them now, not as much in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, but a lot
Yeah,
more of them now are about this, like, okay, are we really compatible? Can
right.
we really make it work? Like, let's do the hard, and sometimes you just read, I mean, romance is a fantasy. Like, that's the point of it.
That's the point. But then we mistake it for how it's supposed to be. And then we
Yep.
set ourselves up to fail because we don't, if we're just going off the tingly feeling
Yep.
without recognizing, okay, where is this tingly feeling coming from? Is it because this person is replicating my parental dynamic? Or is it because this is actually a thing? Without taking that extra step, you end up repeating patterns over and over again that don't serve.
That's fascinating. People joke that you marry your parent, but I had never really kind of put those things together. That's fascinating.
Well, you do, because that's what your nervous system, till you know better, thinks is home. And our nervous systems are committed to homeostasis. Like,
Yeah.
that's what they want us to stay alive, and they want us to stay the way they want homeostasis,
Yeah.
even if the homeostasis is shitty. So this is what's so tricky about engaging in a process of change, because you have to kind of fly under the radar of your subconscious that's just trying to keep things the same. Like your brain is used to the particular chemical soup of neurochemicals that it generates, whether or not it's a great balance of them. Yeah. It just likes things to be the same. And so when you're trying to change and improve, you need to really respect that about your brain and engage in changes that are small enough and measurable that you can celebrate, that you can notice, that don't kick off such a resistance on the part of your subconscious that it stops you. This is why people join the gym on January 1st and they stop going by the 15th, because it's like, I'm going to go 3 days a week and I'm going to do this and I'm going to, It was too big. Your brain was like, nope, we're not doing that. This is scary. This is destabilizing. Stop. And you'll injure yourself, or you won't have time to go anymore, or you'll just lose interest, or something will happen and then you stop going.
So it's small, deliberate changes
measurable,
to activate your inner alchemy, to also activate your alchemy with the folks that you're in covenants with.
That's correct.
I love it. That is the greatest place to hit pause on this. There is no way we're ending this conversation. I absolutely have to have you back so we can keep talking.
I would love that.
But Marie Elizabeth, this has been an honor. Thank you so, so much. Absolutely loved this conversation. Y'all, if you loved it as much as we very clearly did, please hit the thumbs up and then subscribe and do all the YouTube-y things so that you don't miss any conversations like this. To get in touch with Marie Elizabeth, all of her stuff is going to be below in the show notes, and you can interact with all of her brilliance in those ways. And then obviously, if you like these conversations, as I said, I have a lot of them. This is somewhere in the 60th episode range. So there's a lot of really, really fascinating conversations for you to dig your teeth into. Would love for you to join us on our journey to essentially empathy alchemy, which is really what we are looking for here. And I will double check that I can jump on the trademark for that. But anyway, friends, it has been an honor. Friends, it's been an honor to spend this time with you. I am Dr. Kristen Donnelly. My guest has been Marie Elizabeth Malley, and I will see you next time on Welcome to My World. Bye.
Bye-bye.